Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Anna Grosman. I represent Aston University here today. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present. I would like to talk about the industry-university collaborations and give a little bit of the UK perspective. And I would like to put a little bit of structure in these kind of collaborations to give a fresh perspective for the universities who would like to start the collaborations, or for the businesses who would like to start the collaborations, and try to categorize the various collaborations that are currently taking place in Europe and in the US. I'll skip this slide for the sake of time. This gives you an idea of the income by UK universities that is generated through their collaborations with the industry. You can see that we're talking about billions of pounds here. So it's a very, very important component of the source of funding for the UK universities. There is a wide engagement of academics with industries, starting with contract research, joint research, but also consulting. So it takes a really important time of the UK academics. Why do UK academics work with industry? And I think this would be also similar to the rest of Europe. Primarily to gain research income from the governments and also from the industry. Also to have really good applicable research. Very few are actually seeking some intellectual property rights and also some personal income. So there is a wide range of reasons why academics work with the industry. We can categorize these kind of reasons primarily because it actually supports their research. There is a strong correlation between the number of contract years awarded and the grants. You can see that actually there is a very strong relationship between the contractual side of the collaboration with the industry and the governmental side of getting grants. And actually the work with industry results really with the increased publications for the academics. So it's very important for academics to engage with the industry. But what are the barriers of working with the industry? Because, you know, very often we cite that industry and a university have different objectives, you know, different time frames. And we can categorize them into these two categories. So primarily, actually, there are cultural barriers. So very often we say that we don't speak the same language. The primary barrier would be difficulty to find companies with appropriate interest for the academics. Also, the turnover at the firms is high, while academics like to work on long-term projects. Primarily, it's a short-term orientation of industry research that prevents academics working and establishing long-term relationship with the industry. And there are also transactional reasons for these kind of collaboration sometimes have difficulties. It's very often very cumbersome, and there are a lot of administrative rules that have to be approved and overcome before these collaborations would be taking place. But why do firms work with universities? Well, first of all, these would be the reasons on the proprietary side. Very often they basically want to develop another understanding, develop proprietary knowledge, and also they do not have time on specific R&D activities. So very often R&D activities are costly, and it helps the industry to work with academics to outsource some of these R&D activities while they are focusing on shorter term objectives. And there are also other reasons for working with the universities. We hear a lot about open innovation. By opening up, companies can collaborate proactively and openly with different universities and also collaborate with each other. So I will be giving examples of how major pharmaceutical companies, while competing fiercely in their markets, are creating open collaborative centers where they invest next to each other and work with the universities. But what are the barriers on the other hand experienced by firms with working with the universities? Well, there are two types of barriers that I categorize into, well, actually three types: into cultural, transactional, and institutional. As I mentioned, very often there is a mutual lack of understanding about expectations. And while universities are oriented towards pure science, firms, are under pressure to deliver results on a more shorter time scale. It's very difficult to find the appropriate partner. There is a variety of universities that would like to work, with the blue chip companies, and how to find this right partner. It's often a problem it's a question for businesses. I think also university researchers are seeking fast dissemination of results, and that could be a problem for companies that are working on very proprietary tools, for example, such as Rolls-Royce. They would like to, have an exclusivity of, first right of refusals over the results that the tech centers are producing for them. So this contradicts with the, primarily objectives of an academic to disseminate the research, to be able to publish quickly the research from these collaborations. So how do we make this work? How do we meet the objectives of the universities and industry? This is what I'm trying to address here. So I try to categorize the industry-university collaborations into these four categories. And the primary dimensions that universities who are looking at collaborating with businesses and businesses who are looking to collaborate with universities are looking for would be the time dimension, whether the projects are long-term or short-term, and also the sort of the level of openness, whether this is a protected environment or whether this is an environment that is, open source and can be disseminated widely through the web and other sources. So I categorize these into four different categories. So open and short would be an example of an idea lab, similar to what Hewlett-Packard labs are setting, and that would be working with academics on a very short-term objectives by making these objectives publicly available and the results publicly available as well. And then there is a protected and short type of collaboration, which I call an extended workbench. This is essentially a short-term project that companies would like to outsource to academics, but are, they are protected. So there are agreements in place that make sure that the research is not disseminated. And then on this end, there are long-term projects, open and long-term, are classified as a grand challenge. And within this kind of category, it's actually, the way to go forward because these collaborations are open, and the research from this collaboration can be published and disseminated. On the other hand, it is really a sweet spot for academics because it's long-term, so the academics have time to focus on fundamental problems. And this one is protected and long. And David gave an example of the initiative that is done by Rolls-Royce Tech Centers, and I will go a little bit into more detail about this. So it's really choosing the right partner for this kind of research initiatives, but protecting the results and making sure that the knowledge stays within the company. So what are the examples of these different collaborations? And perhaps, you know, as you are thinking of these collaborations, and as we heard earlier, funding for universities in Vietnam primarily comes from public sources. So how can you improve the funding from the private sector? And perhaps that would be looking at your objectives and the objectives of the companies and try to merge them together. So this is an example of an open and short collaboration, and there are a few companies that are very active in this space. So Labs HP essentially runs an open contest every year. They receive about 500 proposals. Only 50 are selected, and the size of grant is very small, but it attracts a lot of good publicity, and it really ranges into very different areas. One of the examples would be gesture-based keyboard and then a smart patch for painless injections. So it's really very different scientific initiatives. Another example would be grants for targets. The good thing about that type of collaboration is that academics benefit from a bioscientist as a project partner. So they're not just going on their own, they are actually part of the team. They're integrated into BIAS team to work on their projects. So this is an example of an open and short-term collaboration. An extended workbench collaboration would be an example of a protected environment, but also short-term. So why do firms do that? Essentially, it's because it's short-term. For them, it would be just to establish the type of collaboration that they would then extend into long-term. So for these kind of collaborations, firms have to have a broad database of university contacts that they could just take for a very specific project that they have to run ad hoc on a very short-term scale. For that, what would help is for the firms to establish in advance framework agreements, because universities are notoriously administrative when it comes to implementing the legal side of the agreements. So what Procter & Gamble do with a lot of universities, such as the State of Ohio University, Durham University, and Hebrew University in Israel, is that they've already set up collaborative agreements with them. So these are kind of template agreements that they have, so to facilitate the administrative process when needed. Intel actually uses an intermediary, University Industry Research Corporation, which acts as a single intermediary between industry sponsors and universities in its larger centers and institutes. So it's setting up this necessary, framework to be able to act quickly. David talked a little bit, David talked a lot about Rolls-Royce, and I'm actually quite glad that we have an overlap in our presentation, because Rolls-Royce is really an example of a protected and long-term industry-university collaboration. They've been doing this for the last 20 years, and these 30 centers that they've set up with universities around the world are each specialized in a very narrow area. So they've actually handpicked universities from around the world to focus on very specific research areas, such as combustion, on noise and pollution reduction. And there is a lot of funding coming for these projects. But the confidentiality and intellectual property provisions are in place. And as David mentioned, it seems like these kind of collaborations do generate research publications as well. There were about 500 research publications generated. So I guess it's carefully crafting in the agreement the way the researchers can be disseminating their work. But it has to be discussed closely with the industry partner. And then kind of on the crossroads between the open and proprietary collaborations, there are this kind of pragmatic centers. So although they are protected, this confidentiality, intellectual property remains kind of in the background. And the focus for research in these areas would be on industry commons, so research tools, new disciplines, and novel areas. And then finally, this is a really interesting type of collaboration. It's a grand challenge. Basically, it's open source, and it's long-term. So it's a really sweet spot for academics. An example of this kind of collaboration would be the Structural Genomics Consortium. It's a drug discovery initiatives that has been set up together with Oxford and Stockholm universities. It received $30 million of funding, and the funding comes from Wellcome Trust, but also for, interestingly, most of the pharma firms. So it comes from Novartis, GSK, Merck, and other firms. So they're actually competing fiercely. But for this initiative, they came together to find new 3D human proteins that are used for cancer research and other molecular disorders. There is no intellectual property. So those who are collaborating in these initiatives can actually disseminate the findings. Although still the objectives of the funders are safely guarded. So even though this research is open source, there are still walls around what kind of objectives the funders would like to get from this. What are what is suitable for open partnership and what is suitable for proprietary partnership? If you are doing sort of basic research or emerging grant challenging, then you should go for open partnership and seek public grants. The academic and industrial incentives would be more aligned. It will be easier to disseminate research, but the control for the industrial partner is harder. So if you're looking at proprietary partnership, if you're trying to develop something that you would like to keep in-house, then of course, this will not be something suitable for you.
Anna, could I ask you to bring it to a close?
Yeah.
Please.
And finally, just the final slide to show you different ways of collaboration and really open the discussion of what would be the future of collaborations. What are the new model of open collaboration, whether that's crowdsourcing or intermediaries, and at Aston, we would like to, be positioned somewhere here to, be a hub for these kind of initiatives. So be an intermediary between the firms and the universities. As Aston, as Alison mentioned, we'd like to be a center point for, initiatives in Vietnam, for example. So yeah, these are just some questions for discussion. What would be the new models of open collaboration? Crowdsourcing is an interesting one that I would like to discuss. What are the governance mechanisms for this collaboration? And what are the levels of disclosures for industrial partners? So yeah, thank you very much. Sorry to.
Thank you very much, Anna.
you.